The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been awake since 5, sitting in the parking lot of a Walmart in Pensacola, Florida, trying to decide if I had enough change in my coat pocket to buy a cup of coffee from the machine inside. That's what my life had become. Counting quarters, watching the sky go from black to grey through a cracked windshield, wondering how a woman who had taught 3rd grade for 31 years ended up sleeping in a 2009 Honda Civic with a broken heater and a trunk full of garbage bags stuffed with everything she had left in the world. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a number I didn't recognize. Normally I wouldn't have answered, but when you have nothing left to lose, you stop being careful about things like that. June? The voice on the other end was warm, familiar in a way that took me a moment to place. June, it's Harriet. Harriet. My older brother's wife. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years. I didn't say anything at first. I just pressed the phone harder against my ear and stared at a shopping cart someone had left in the middle of the parking lane. I know this is out of the blue, she said, but Raymond found out what happened. He found out everything. I closed my eyes. Everything. That was a word that carried a lot of weight. Let me go back to the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. I retired from teaching in the spring of 2019. 31 years, the same elementary school in Clearwater, the same classroom on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the live oak tree. I loved that job more than I can say, but my knees had been bad for years, and my doctor told me plainly that I needed to stop standing on hard floors for 8 hours a day. So I retired. I had a pension. I had my savings. I had a small house in Clearwater that I had owned for 22 years, paid off the mortgage myself 11 months before my husband passed. I thought I was going to be fine. My daughter Melissa, no wait, I have to use a different name. She'd know immediately. Let me call her by what she became to me in those last months, a stranger. Actually, let me give her a name that fits. I'll call her Dawn. And her husband, I'll call Craig. Dawn had always been the one I worried about less. She was sharp, organized, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and never missed a credit card payment. When she married Craig, I thought she had done well for herself. He was in finance, talked fast, smiled easily, always had an answer for everything. I told myself those were good qualities in a man. They had 2 kids. I adored those grandchildren. That was the hook, I think. That was how it started. In the fall of 2020, Dawn called me and said Craig had been laid off. The pandemic had hit his firm hard. They were struggling to make rent on their place in Tampa. Could they stay with me for a few months, just until things settled? I said yes. Of course I said yes. They moved in with a U-Haul and 3 carloads of stuff, and my 2 grandchildren, and I made room for everyone and told myself this was what family was for. The first few months were fine. Crowded, but fine. Then small things started to change. Craig began handling the household bills. Just to take some stress off your plate, June, he said. He set up auto-pay for the utilities and the internet, and he started redirecting the statements to his email. I didn't think much of it. I trusted him. He was my daughter's husband. He was the father of my grandchildren. Then one day I went to withdraw money from my savings account, and the teller told me the balance was lower than I expected, significantly lower. I asked for a statement. When I looked at the withdrawals, some of them I didn't recognize. I brought it up with Craig that evening, and he had an explanation ready. Home repairs, he said, the water heater, the roof inspection, groceries. He showed me receipts on his phone, scrolling so fast I couldn't read them properly. Dawn sat next to him and nodded at everything he said. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next year, Craig convinced me to add him to my bank account for convenience, in case something happened to me and bills needed to be paid. He convinced me to sign documents related to the house, a refinancing, he said, to get me a lower rate and free up some cash. I signed where he pointed. I didn't understand all of it. I'm not ashamed to say that. I was a school teacher. I knew how to explain fractions to 8-year-olds. I did not know how to read a real estate transfer document. By the spring of 2022, I didn't own my house anymore. I found out the way you find out these things, by accident. A neighbor mentioned she'd heard my home was listed for sale. I told her she must have been mistaken. I went home and looked it up online myself. There it was, my address, my house, listed under Craig's name through a property management LLC he had created. I confronted Dawn that night. Craig wasn't home. I sat across from my daughter at my own kitchen table and I asked her what was happening. She didn't look at me the way a daughter looks at her mother. She looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they've been waiting to deal with. She said the house had too many expenses. She said the property taxes were going up and the HOA fees were rising, and that they had found a place of their own now that Craig was working again, and that I could rent an apartment somewhere nearby, and that they would help me look. She said all of this in a calm, even voice like she had rehearsed it, and maybe she had. I said, "This is my house. I paid for this house. Your father and I lived in this house for 20 years. She said, "Mom, let's not make this dramatic." That was the last real conversation I had with my daughter for a very long time. They were out within 2 weeks. They took a lot of things when they left. Furniture I hadn't offered, a television, the good set of pots and pans my sister had given me as a retirement gift. I found out later from a neighbour that Craig had sold several items from the garage. But the house, that was the thing I couldn't get past. I hired a lawyer with what little money I had left in a checking account they hadn't accessed. He looked at the documents I had signed and went very quiet. Then he explained to me what Craig had done. It was legal, technically. Craig had been careful. The documents were real, my signatures were real, and proving that I hadn't understood what I was signing, that I'd been deceived, would require a lawsuit that would cost more than I had and take years I wasn't sure I wanted to spend fighting. I couldn't afford the fight, so I lost the house. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Clearwater with the money from a small CD account Craig hadn't found. The rent was manageable for a few months, though my pension payment got rerouted. I still don't know exactly how, whether it was something Craig had set up or an error, but 3 months of payments disappeared, and by the time I sorted it out with the pension office, I was behind on rent. The landlord was not unkind, but he had a business to run. By February of 2023, I was out. I stayed 1 month with a former colleague, a woman from the teacher's lounge who I had known for 20 years, but she had a small place and a husband with health problems, and I could see I was a burden even though she never said so. I left before she had to ask me to. After that, my car. I'm not going to spend too much time on those months, because there are parts of it I still can't talk about without my voice going somewhere I don't want it to go. I'll just say that living in your car is not like anything you imagine before it happens to you. It is cold in ways that have nothing to do with temperature. You become invisible in a way that is different from being alone. People look through you. You start to wonder if you are still the person you used to be, or if that person has simply stopped existing. I called Dawn once, just once, standing outside a gas station in the rain, using my last few percent of phone battery. She answered. I told her where I was. There was a pause, and then she said she was sorry, but they couldn't help right now. Things were complicated, and maybe I should look into county assistance programs. I hung up. I did not call again. The Walmart parking lot in Pensacola was where I'd ended up because I had driven north trying to find cheaper gas and gotten turned around. That was where I was the morning Harriet called. I'd not spoken to my brother Raymond in a long time, not because of any falling out. We'd just drifted the way siblings drift when lives go in different directions. Raymond had built a business in his 30s. Industrial supply, not glamorous, but he had been smart and patient, and it had grown. He lived in Birmingham. We talked at Christmas and sometimes on birthdays. I had not told him what was happening to me because I was ashamed. That's the truth. I was ashamed. But Harriet had heard from someone. She wouldn't tell me exactly who, just that word had gotten back to Raymond, that I had lost my house and was in trouble, and Raymond had sent her to find me. He wants to come, Harriet said. He wanted to get in the car last night. I told him, let me call first. I was crying by then. I don't know when I had started. I was sitting in that parking lot with a quarter in my palm, and I was crying, and I told Harriet I was fine, which was so far from the truth that I almost laughed. Raymond knows you're not fine, she said. He doesn't need you to pretend. He just needs to know where you are. I told her where I was. He drove down the next day, 6 hours, straight through, pulled into that Walmart parking lot in a grey pickup truck, stepped out, looked at my car, looked at me, and didn't say a word. He just put his arms around me and held on. Raymond is 3 years older than me. We grew up in a small house in Georgia with parents who didn't have much but gave us everything they could. He used to walk me to school when I was 6 and he was 9, and he always let me have the window seat on car trips, even though he wanted it to. I had forgotten, somehow, in the business of grown-up life, how much I trusted him. He sat in the passenger seat of my car for a while. He didn't ask me to explain everything right away. He asked if I had eaten. I told him not since yesterday morning. He went inside and came back with coffee and a hot breakfast sandwich from the deli counter, and we sat there in that parking lot and ate in silence for a few minutes. Then he said, "Tell me everything." So I did. It took a long time. I started with Craig moving in, and I went all the way to the gas station phone call to Dawn in the rain. I didn't leave anything out. Raymond listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked out through the windshield for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Raymond had a plan. He'd had it, I think, before he even left Birmingham. He had spoken to a real estate attorney before driving down, not the kind of half-measure lawyer I had first hired, but a firm that handled fraud cases. He had also spoken to his financial advisor, and he had looked at properties in the town on the Florida Gulf Coast, about 40 minutes from where I used to live in Clearwater, because he knew I loved the water, and he wanted me to have something to love again. "I found a condo," he said. 2-bedroom, second floor, view of the bay. It's already under contract pending you're okay. I stared at him. "Raymond, I can't accept." "You can and you will," he said. "I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm not making it a loan. I have more money than Harriet and I will ever spend. Mama would haunt me for the rest of my life if I drove away from this parking lot without fixing this." He also set up an account in my name alone, not joint, not accessible to anyone else, not redirectable by anyone else. He put money in it, enough that my pension, when it was fully restored, would be a supplement rather than a lifeline. He had an attorney draw up the paperwork. He sat with me while I read every word. "Read it all," he said. "Take as long as you need. Don't sign anything you don't understand, not ever again." I read it all. Took almost an hour. Then I signed it. The condo was on the second floor of a low-rise building near Bradenton, bay view from the living room, a small balcony where I could put a chair and watch the pelicans, a guest room for when Harriet visited. The building had a gate, a code, and a property manager who knew my face within 2 weeks and waved every morning. I moved in on a Tuesday in April. I stood in the middle of the living room with the afternoon light coming in off the water, and I let myself feel, for the first time in over a year, that I was allowed to be somewhere. For about 3 weeks, it was quiet. Then Dawn called. I saw her name on the screen and I sat with it for a moment before answering. I noticed that my hands didn't shake. That surprised me. "Mom." Her voice was different than it had been at the gas station. Softer. Warmer. Careful. "I've been trying to reach you. I didn't have your new number. I had to get it through on Harriet." I said, "What do you need, Dawn?" A small pause. I wanted to check on you. I heard you're doing better. I'm glad. I've been worried." I didn't say anything. "The kids have been asking about you," she said. "They miss their grandma. Maybe we could get together sometime, have dinner, let you see them." There was. My grandchildren. She knew exactly where to put the key. I thought about what Raymond had said to me the week before. He hadn't been dramatic about it. He just sat on my balcony with a glass of iced tea and said, "People don't change the way they hurt you, June. They just get more creative about how they come back." "I'm glad the kids are doing well," I said. "Tell them I love them." "Mum, I think if we just talked." "Dawn," I said, "I'm not ready for that, and I don't know when I will be." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Craig didn't mean for things to go that far. He got into some financial trouble and he panicked, and it got out of hand. He feels terrible." I almost laughed again. That thing I do now when something is so far beyond my ability to respond to it, that laughter is the only honest reaction. "He can feel whatever he feels," I said. "That's not my concern right now." I ended the call. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and looked out at the water. She tried twice more over the following months. The second time she brought up the grandchildren again. The third time she mentioned that Craig was dealing with some legal issues. She didn't say what, but Harriet told me later that Raymond's attorney had filed a civil complaint and that a forensic accountant had been looking at the property transfer documents. I don't know exactly what Craig was facing. I didn't ask. I told Harriet I didn't need to know the details. What I knew was this. I was not going to let the threat of missing my grandchildren pull me back into a situation that had almost destroyed me. That is the hardest sentence I have ever written, because I love those children. I love them with the same part of me that loved their mother when she was small enough to sit on my lap and read picture books. And someday, when they are old enough to understand, I hope I can explain why I had to step back. I hope they won't hate me for it. But I also know that I spent 31 years teaching children what was right and wrong. And the clearest lesson I ever taught was this: what someone does to you matters, and you do not have to pretend that it doesn't in order to be kind. Raymond came back down in May, this time with Harriet, and we spent 5 days together. We cooked in my new kitchen and walked along the water in the evenings. One afternoon, Harriet and I sat on the balcony with wine while Raymond grilled something on the small grill he'd bought at Home Depot and insisted on carrying up the stairs himself. It was ordinary and warm and quiet, the way the best days usually are. One evening, as we were sitting out there watching the sky go orange over the bay, Raymond said, "You know, when I was driving down to that parking lot, I kept thinking about when you were 6 and I used to walk you to school." I looked at him. "You always stopped at the same crack in the sidewalk," he said. "Every single morning, you would jump over it, both feet together. You never missed it. Even if you were tired, even if we were running late." He smiled. I don't know why I kept thinking about that. I didn't say anything for a minute. Then I said, "I think I just didn't want to step on it." He laughed. "I know, I never understood why." "Because it felt like if I stepped on it, something would break," I said. "Something I couldn't see." We sat with that for a while. The pelicans were moving in a slow line out over the water. The grill was popping softly behind us. I am 68 years old. I was a teacher for 31 years, and I thought I knew what mattered and what didn't. I thought I had raised a daughter who understood the difference. I was wrong about that, and living with being wrong about that is something I do every day, quietly, the way you carry things that have no solution. But I also know that I am sitting on a balcony with the bay view, drinking wine with my brother and his wife, watching the pelicans come home for the evening. I am not in that parking lot anymore. And I did not step on the crack. There is something I think about now, sitting on that balcony in the evenings with the bay going quiet and the pelicans settling in for the night. I think about how long it took me, a woman who spent 31 years teaching children right from wrong, to recognize that the same rules I taught in that classroom applied to my own life too, that actions have consequences, that what you do to people does not simply disappear. It lands somewhere. It always lands somewhere. Craig did not set out one morning and decide to destroy me. That is what I have come to understand. He made one small choice and then another, and each one made the next one easier. That is how it works. Not with a single terrible moment, but with a slow accumulation of small surrenders to a worse version of yourself. And Dawn, my daughter, the child I raised, she stood beside him and let it happen. She told herself stories I imagined the way people do when they need to sleep at night. That I would be fine, that I was resilient, that someone else would help. The mind is very creative when it wants to avoid the weight of what it's doing. What I know now, in a way I did not know before, is that integrity is not a quality you have or don't have. It is a choice you make in small moments, over and over, when no one is checking. Craig failed that choice dozens of times before I ever knew anything was wrong. And the cost of those failures was not just mine to pay, it was his, and Dawn's, and in ways they may not yet understand, their children's too. The bill always comes. Raymond made different choices. He always had. When he was 9 years old, walking me to school, he could have complained about it. He could have dragged his feet, made me feel like a burden. He never did. That is not a small thing. Who a person is at 9 years old and who they are at 65, there is usually a thread connecting those two people if you look closely enough. What Raymond gave me was not just a condo and a financial reset, though those things saved my life in the most literal sense. What he gave me was the use of my own mind again, sitting with me while I read every document, telling me to take as long as I needed, not rushing me, not deciding for me, not treating me like someone too old or too tired to understand her own affairs. That kind of respect, the kind that trusts another person's intelligence even when circumstances have temporarily overwhelmed it, that is one of the rarest things one person can offer another. I think about the crack in the sidewalk, that small ritual I had as a 6-year-old, jumping over it every morning so something invisible wouldn't break. I spent most of my adult life trying to step carefully around the cracks, trying to keep everything intact, and then the people I trusted most walked me straight over the edge anyway. But I did not break. That is the thing I want to say most clearly. To anyone who might be sitting somewhere right now wondering if they will, You do not know what is still in you until something tries to take everything. I did not know I had that kind of endurance until I had no other choice but to find out. It was not graceful. It was a parking lot and a cold car and a quarter in my palm and a cup of coffee I wasn't sure I could afford, but I stayed. I made the next phone call. I told the truth to my brother when he asked. That is all endurance ever is, really. Just staying present for one more hour, one more day, until the person who loves you can find the parking lot where you're sitting. I'm 68 years old and I am not in that parking lot anymore.